Hello everyone. In a series of videos, I presented 10 biblical prophecies pointing to a return of Jesus Christ close to our time. And for some prophecies, a more precisely dated return in 2030, which is 2,000 years after the incarnation of Jesus in the world. Now, and in this series of 6 videos, I will outline a possible timeline of the events of the apocalypse if they were indeed to begin soon. In this first video, I will talk about the first stage of this timeline, namely the announcement of the major events of the apocalypse. This announcement likely already took place on September 23, 2017. On that day, an exceptional constellation exactly reproduced the sign in the sky described in chapter 12 of the book of Revelation by St. John. But this video will also, first and foremost, set the backdrop for the events of the apocalypse. This backdrop will allow for an understanding of the analysis that leads to a proposed timeline of the major events of the apocalypse. This timeline is, of course, proposed with great humility and caution, for who can boast of having deciphered the enigmas of the book of Revelation, but at the same time, one must acknowledge the coherence between the prophecies of the book of Revelation and the political events that have recently occurred, and others that are expected to happen soon. We also notice the coherence between these prophecies and exceptional astronomical signs, which have recently appeared on very specific and symbolic dates. If all these signs are correctly interpreted, then Jesus Christ will manifest in 2033, which is 2,000 years after his death and resurrection. We know, according to the Bible, that he will return after a 7-year period of the Antichrist's reign, which would therefore begin in 2026. And that before this reign of the Antichrist, referred to as the beast in the Apocalypse of St. John, there will be a sort of preparatory phase with the release of the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse. Now, since the year 2023, several political events and astronomical phenomena give the impression that we have entered this preparatory phase, included in what Jesus Christ himself had called the beginning of sorrows. In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 24, the disciples of Jesus ask him what will be the signs of his return and the end of the world. And Jesus responds by providing a chronology of events. First, people will deceive believers by giving a false image of Christ. With everything we see on social media, we can consider that this is already the case. Then there will be wars and rumors of wars, meaning threats of war, without the worst having yet occurred. We are right in the middle of that as well. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. This brings to mind the confrontation between NATO and the BRICS. In various places, there will be famines and earthquakes. There have recently been exceptionally deadly earthquakes in Turkey, Syria, Morocco, and Afghanistan. Inflation is also problematic for poor countries where food security is not guaranteed. Jesus says that all this is the beginning of sorrows. He continues by saying that there will then be a persecution of Christians. You will be hated by all nations because of my name. He then mentions many false prophets, a widespread lack of charity, and then the proclamation of the gospel throughout the world. This part of Matthew 24 clearly corresponds to the events in the book of Revelation associated with the opening of the seals. The events begin when Jesus successively opens the 7 seals of a book. The first 4, in particular, release the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which we have all heard about, of course, even non-believers. Then, in Matthew 24, Jesus says that after this the end will come. The end of times, it is a period of 7 years that precedes the return of Jesus Christ, and during which the Antichrist reigns with a war that lasts 3.5 years. We know this thanks to the book of the prophet Daniel, and the 3.5-year war is also mentioned in the book of Revelation. The beginning of this period clearly coincides with the sounding of the 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation. After each trumpet sound, God exercises his judgment and sends a punishment to men, but only after having protected his servants with his seal. In this part of Matthew 24, Jesus mentions the desecration of holy places, a persecution of the Israelis, the appearance of false messiahs, and finally, his direct intervention. Regarding this intervention, Jesus says that his sign will appear in the sky. He is speaking about the sign of the cross, of course. And that afterwards, he will send his angels with a resounding trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the 4 corners of the world, from one end of the heavens to the other. This likely corresponds to the rapture of Christians. Thanks to the Apostle St. Paul, we know that the rapture of Christians will occur at the sounding of the seventh and final trumpet of the apocalypse, and that it will consist of joining Jesus in the kingdom of heaven. The bodies of these Christians will be transformed in the same way as those of the dead in paradise, who will be resurrected body, soul, and spirit. But we know from parables, gospels, like those of the foolish virgins and the wise virgins, that not all Christians will be taken, probably only those who follow the commandments of Jesus. Then there will still be 7 bowls of wine poured out on the earth, and 7 plagues that represent the punishments of God. There you have, in summary, the main events of the apocalypse. With all these biblical elements, cross-referenced with the context of today's society, one can imagine a scenario of the end times. This scenario goes from the opening of the first seal to the sounding of the seventh trumpet. Our goal, of course, is to be among the Christians who will be taken by Jesus, so it is not necessarily very interesting to know what will happen after the seventh trumpet. It is important to understand that, according to the text of Revelation, not all men will be treated the same way. The servants of God will be protected by a mark on their foreheads. This is an image that does not specify how, concretely, this protection will occur, but in any case, it is promised by God. Some Christians, like those of the Church of Philadelphia, have God's favor. They will be protected, according to Jesus' own words, at the hour of temptation that will come upon the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. To other Christians, other churches, it is asked to repent to avoid punishments on their priests who betray the commandments of God. Revelation indeed begins with the expression of God's judgment on 7 churches. These 7 churches symbolize 7 different types of Christian society, or 7 ways of living the Christian faith. This judgment runs through the history of Christianity. We know this because Jesus says to John, "Write therefore what you have seen, what is now, and what will take place later." The letters to the 7 churches, thank you, thus summarize the history of Christianity from the creation of the church to the end of times. With that established, we can move on to the chronology of events. To avoid overly long videos, I will not repeat here the entirety of the argumentation already provided in other videos, particularly the 6th video on the 10 biblical prophecies, to justify the interpretation hypotheses chosen. The first notable date in the Apocalypse calendar is September 23rd, 2017. This date corresponds to the announcement of the upcoming events of the Apocalypse by an exceptional astronomical configuration. This exceptional configuration exactly reproduced the sign in the sky from the book of Revelation chapter 12. I quote Revelation 12. "A great sign appeared in the sky, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and she cried out, being in labor and in the pains of childbirth." Now, on September 23rd, 2017, the great sign in the sky, seen by John, materialized in the constellation of Virgo. The moon appeared under the feet of Virgo, outlined by the stars of the constellation that bears her name. The sun surrounded her with its halo, and a crown was formed above her head by the position of 12 stars. The crown corresponded to the alignment of the 9 stars of the constellation Leo, thank you, and the 3 planets Mercury, Mars, and Venus, which could have been taken for stars by St. John in his vision. At exactly the same moment, Jupiter, the queen planet of the solar system, which can thus symbolize Christ, the King, was found near the womb of the Virgin, drawn by the stars, precisely in the area where a child could be born. The interpretation given to this sign is that it was prophesied by Pharaoh Mercy's dream, illuminated by Joseph in the book of Genesis. Once again, the entire justification for this interpretation was given in the 6th video on the 10 prophecies. Among other reasons, this interpretation is based on Joseph's role as a precursor to Christ and on a prophetic vision of Joseph in his youth, which recalls the sign in the sky of Revelation 12. And also because in the Bible the theme of the harvest of the thank you harvest is frequently used as a symbol of God's judgment at the end of times. This dream of Pharaoh, therefore, is the one where he sees 7 fat cows and 7 beautiful ears of grain, which represent 7 years of abundance. They are swallowed by 7 lean cows and 7 withered ears, which represent the 7 years of famine that will follow. Joseph then advises Pharaoh to set aside 20% of the harvests during the 7 years of abundance to stockpile food for the 7 years of famine. The idea here is that for 7 years, the Virgin Mary, Mother of the Church, and the woman of the sign in Revelation 12 will set aside a harvest of Christians, in quotes, and perhaps also a harvest of the righteous, meaning people who will instruct others on the manipulations of the powers in place during a troubled period. These Christians of the harvest will hopefully be protected in one way or another during the Great Tribulation. They will alleviate the world's sufferings through their prayers, prepare for the return of Jesus, and be by his side for the judgment of the world and the reign of Christ over the world. This harvest of Christians would explain the significant increase in baptisms in Europe and the recent expansion of Christianity in Asia, notably. For the grace of God allows his word to be heard more before the day of judgment, and that men righteous and good may know his truth. The materialization in space of the sign of the woman holds obvious interest in the eyes of God to warn us and prepare us for the subsequent events. The prophecy of the 7 years of abundance, followed by the 7 years of famine, implies, if it is relevant, for our apocalypse scenario, that the year 2024 will be a milestone year. 2017 plus 7 years equals 2024, then 2024 plus 7 years equals 2031. In another video, we will talk about the other sign in the sky from the book of Revelation, which appeared in 2024, that of the exceptional comet, nicknamed the Comet of the Century, especially for its trajectory on October 13, 2024. It is also possible that the sign of September 23, 2017 will be followed 9 years later, around September-October 2026, by another notable event. The 9 years that have passed would then represent the 9 months of a pregnancy. This pregnancy refers to the labor pains of the pregnant woman in Revelation 12. She is to give birth to a son who will rule the nations with a rod of iron and who is caught up to God and his throne. This son is Jesus Christ, but he can also symbolize the religion of Christianity or the Christian peoples. Christians indeed form the body of Jesus Christ in Christian theology. Jesus said to St. Paul when he was persecuting Christians just before his conversion on the road to Damascus, Paul, why do you persecute me? Because Jesus equated the persecuted Christians with himself. There might therefore also be a painful event in September-October 2026 that will give birth to a joyful event for the Christian Church. But for now, and in the following video, we will explain the dates and significant events of the year 2023. Significant because they triggered the arrival of the first Christians, horsemen of the apocalypse. Thank you for listening to me. Feel free to like and share this information. And why not join us in the non-virtual world? Have a good day, and may God bless you.